أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين أبي القاسم محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا الله Amma ba'd, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Continuing with our discussion on Nahj al-Balaghah, the first khutbah that we've been discussing. We've reached the point in this first khutbah where inshallah we'll be talking about this section which has to deal with the choosing of Anbiya. That ikhtiyarul Anbiya, choosing of the Anbiya, is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have a mic on? It's in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, this is something which is directly out of the ayat of Quran as well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers and mentions in the beginning of Surah Baqarah, Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa. I am the one who's placing on this land a khalifa from me. So, with that kept in mind, let's read through this first portion. Imam begins by saying, وَاصْطَفَى سُبْحَانَهُ مِنْ وَلَدِهِ أَنْبِيَاءَ أَخَذَ عَلَى الْوَحْيِ مِيثَاقَهُم. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose from the progeny of Hazrat Adam, أَنْبِيَاءَ أَخَذَ عَلَى الْوَحْيِ مِيثَاقَهُم. Prophets, and took their pledge from His revelation and for carrying His message as their trust. So first of all, Allah chooses from the progeny of Hazrat Adam alayhi salatu wasalam. Number two, takes a pledge from them. Mithaq is basically ahad, a covenant. You've heard the word mithaq a lot. Basically, another word for mithaq is ahad, or a covenant. किस चीज़ के बारे में? अला तबलीग ar-risalati amanatahum. Number one, for the revelation and tabligh of their risalat which is given to them. Wahi, and then with that wahi that comes the responsibility of doing the tabligh. That's why on numerous occasions in the Quran you read from the tongue of Rasulullah who says, وَمَا عَلَيْنَا إِلَّا الْبَلَاغِ. Meaning what? Nothing upon it except tabligh. We'll continue to do tabligh, iblagh, conveying the message. Now, if they listen, alhamdulillah. If they don't listen, so be it. What's our duty that we have taken the mithaq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to do tabligh. We'll never back down from that. Regardless of how much persecution there is, regardless of how many struggles and obstacles that come in our way, we'll continue to do this tabligh. So you know the story of Hazrat Ibrahim, you know the story of Hazrat Nuh, how Surah Nuh talks about it, that some of the difficulties Hazrat Nuh had to face, as mentioned in Surah Nuh, is that فَجَعَلَهُمْ أَصَابِعَهُمْ فِي آذَانِهِمْ, that people will put their fingers in their ears. Hazrat Nuh is giving a lecture, tabligh, and what they're doing, they're putting their fingers in their ears. We don't want to listen to you, in other words. Or back then people used to have these abas and cloaks. They'll cover their heads with it to show disrespect. And that was not enough. They'll throw pebbles or stones at him, to the extent that he would get, of course, hurt. لما بدل أكثر خلقه عهد الله إليهم فجهلوا حقه. In course of time, many people perverted Allah's trust with them and ignored His position and took what? فجهلوا حقه. Basically, they kept aloof of the haqq that is, belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then they took what? Compeers along with him. وَاتَّخَذُوا الْأَنْدَادَ مَعَهُ basically refers to those who took partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, associated, partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, any type of shirk that is being mentioned here. وَاشْتَالَتْهُمْ شَيَاطِينَ عَنْ مَعْرِفَتِهِ وَاشْتَالَتْهُمْ شَيَاطِينَ وَاشْتَالَتْهُمْ basically harafathum. Shayateen turned them away. Directions ko change kar dene ko, basically is what's being referred to. You're going in this direction, someone changes your direction. So that's what the shayateen did. They turned them away from knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and kept them aloof from His worship. So وَاشْتَالَتْهُمُ الشَّيَاطِينَ عَنْ مَعْرِفَتِهِ وَاقْتَطَعَتْهُمْ عَنْ إِبَادَتِهِ. Two things the shaitan is doing. One, he doesn't want you to recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And once he's been successful in that, he's going to stop you from doing the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, sometimes he'll just stop you from doing the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if you recognize him. So, that is some of us. Many of the mu'mineen and Muslimeen, those who believe, or muwahideen rather, those who believe that there is one God, but they won't worship Him. They're kept aloof from doing the ibadat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is one of the elements of ibadat? What does ibadat do to you? Well, the form and the shape of ibadat that we have in Islam, maybe other nations don't have that. One of the values of this ibadat is that it breaks your arrogance, right? When you place your forehead on the ground in humility, it's breaking and shattering your ego that you belong to this earth. That's where you come from, and you're placing your topmost part of your body, which is much respected, where you're rubbing it on the ground. In English, I don't know the way to use this terminology, but in Urdu, कहते थे ज़मीन को नाक पे रगड़ना. यानी क्या होता है मुराद कि अगर किसी को आपने ज़मीन पे नाक रगड़वाई है तो यानी उसकी इज्जत जो है वो खाक में मिला दी. Right? That you put your forehead, people, they used to wear the turbans. किसी की turban को, पगड़ी को ज़मीन पे फेंक देना, ये बेइज्जती की अलामत है. So to make someone rub their head on the ground, or to rub their nose on the ground, nose basically because of the ego comes from nose से associate किया जाता है. इनकी नाक बड़ी लंबी है, नाक बड़ी ये है, तो ego is associated with that. That it was a sign of disrespect. What do? We place our forehead on the ground, on khak. This is another dalil for putting your head on this sajdagah, on this turbat. Turbat pe kyun rakhte hain? Because this is what we're made of. So we place our forehead on top of that as well. So to shatter this ego of yours, to bring this arrogance out of you and throw it away forever. Shaitan was thrown out because of his ego, because of his arrogance. So what does he want? He said, if a person starts worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he will never be arrogant. So let me make him arrogant. How am I going to make him arrogant? Keep him away from ibadat. So that's one of his tactics. All right. Then Imam gets into the sending of prophets. فَبَعَثَ فِيهِمْ رُسُلَهُ. And of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent His messengers. وَوَاتَرَ إِلَيْهِمْ أَنْبِيَاهُ. Watara means, a series, one after, there's 124,000. We only know 45 of them by name. 25 of them are mentioned in Quran. The rest are mentioned in the books of Ahadith. Only 45. There are some that are mentioned in the biblical references. Don't know if they're Nabi or not, but nonetheless, 45 altogether out of 124,000. So when 124,000 have come, they come as a series of Anbiya. And many existed at the same time. لَيَسْتَعْدُوهُمْ مِيثَاقَ فِطْرَتِهِ. Number 1. وَيُذَكِّرُوهُمْ مَنْسِيَّ نِعْمَتِهِ. Number 2. وَيَحْتَجُّ عَلَيْهِمْ بِالتَّبْلِيغِ. 3 things that are mentioned. First, why He sent a series of prophets towards them to get them to fulfill the pledges of His creation. There's a mithaq that we took from the Anbiya, and there was a mithaq, an ahad, and a covenant we made with you, with your souls as well. Number one. Number two, to recall to them bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You've forgotten the bounties. You forget that this is a bounty of Allah, that He has given you this life. You forget that He's given you, ability to breathe. You forget that He's given you all these organs. You forget that He's given you family. You forget that He's given you this air. You forget that He's given you these parents, these teachers, Anbiya, Awliya, A'imma Yatar. All of these are the ni'mat. These are all the ni'mat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At most, He's given you this aql to comprehend all the ni'mat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Who doesn't comprehend the ni'mat of Allah? The one who's lacking aql. For example, if someone who is mentally challenged, he's unable to comprehend some of the things that are given to him. He's unable to appreciate what Allah has, bounties that Allah has given to him. Right? You don't expect him to acknowledge, because he's lacking that intellect. Similarly, because he's lacking intellect, rufi'a an ummati, rufi'a al-qalam. This child or this man or this person who is, mentally challenged, there's no obligation upon him. He doesn't have to prostrate in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If he does so, that's fine. If he doesn't, Allah will not hold him accountable on the Day of Judgment. So with this aql comes what? Responsibility. You recognize the bounties of Allah. What do? You bow in front of Him. You prostrate in front of Him. وَيَحْتَجُّ عَلَيْهِمْ بِالتَّبْلِيغِ, and to exhort them by preaching. وَيُثِيرُ لَهُمْ دَفَائِنَ الْأُقُولِ, to unveil before them the hidden virtues of wisdom. Hidden virtues of wisdom. Who's going to go ahead and decrypt for us? Decipher for us? Who's going to go ahead and open up the abwab of knowledge and wisdom? Of course, these Anbiya. They're the ones who are equipped with the proper knowledge. وَيُرُوهُمْ آيَاتِ الْمَقْدِرَةِ مِنْ سَقْفِ فَوْقِهِمْ مَرْفُوعٍ وَمِهَادِ تَحْتَهُمْ مَوْضُوعٍ وَمَعَائِشَ تُهْيِيهِمْ وَآجَالِ تُفْنِيهِمْ. What are the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made these Anbiya do? He made them open up the hidden virtues of wisdom, show them the signs of the omnipotence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yurohum ayatil maqdira. Those ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that may not have been very obvious to us. Amongst them are what? The sky which is raised over them. Now we look at the sky which is raised over them. We've touched this in the creation of the universe before, so we're not going to go in that detail. But this is a similar reference you find in Quran as well. I believe in Surah Ra'd, where Allah mentions that He raised the skies without any columns, right? There's a reference in Surah Ra'd, I can't think of the ayat, that the lam tarawnaha masalan. You don't see them, but there are these skies that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has raised without any of these columns. If you make a saqf is the ceiling. The word that is used over here is min saqfi fawqahum, right? Min saqfi fawqahum. That saqf in Farsi or in Arabic means the ceiling, the roof. छत को raise किया जाता है ताकि आपको सर न टकराए. So this roof is higher than your height. Allah raised this roof above you, and you create roofs for your houses as well. You know how the creation or the making of the roof, engineering is involved in it, right? You need to have columns, you need to have something supporting it, otherwise it'll come right down on your head. You need to check the balance and all that stuff has to be there. There has to be something which is carrying it. Even if it's a huge, humongous roof nowadays with the engineering, technology that they have, they'll make humongous, dome. You don't really see the, pillars in between. But they've managed the weight of the dome in a sense, in a way that it is still, able to be raised, yet it is safe, and it is, stationed on the ground, right? It has roots. It has some sort of balance coming back to the ground. All the weight is resting on the ground, and that's how it is erected and raised. Even if you don't see pillars in the middle. That's the engineering marvel today. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raised this huge, humongous roof above your head without any columns that you don't even see. وَمِحَادِ تَحْتِهِمْ مَوْضُوء. So number one was He raised the sky over them. Number two, the earth that is placed beneath them. And of course, all the marvels of this earth that you and I cannot comprehend. وَمِحَادٍ تَحْتَهُمْ مَوْضُوء. وَمِن سَقْفٍ فَوْقَهُمْ مَرْفُوعٍ وَمِن مِحَادٍ تَحْتَهُمْ مَوْضُوعٍ وَمَعَائِشَ تُحْيِيهِمْ وَآجَالٍ تُفْنِيهِمْ. And then what He did? Means of living that sustain them, ghaza that is provided to you, or the life that is given to you, all the things that you need in order to survive. You and I don't need. You and I are experts in things that we need to survive. What do we need on a daily basis? What do we need for few hours? Every few hours, what do we need? All of these things you can think of, refer back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's the one who provided all that for you. Deaths that make them die, that is also given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa awsabin, continues by saying, wa awsabin tuhrimuhum. Awsab, comes from mata'ib, ta'ab, difficulties, ailments that turn them old, and incidents that successfully betake them. Imam goes towards the conclusion of this part of this portion of Ikhtiyar al-Anbiya, where Imam mentions وَلَمْ يُخْلِ اللَّهُ سُبْحَانَهُ خَلْقَهُ مِن نَبِيٍّ مُرْسَالٍ. This is another favor of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah never allowed His creation to remain without a prophet. In fact, what Allah did was, there was no creation and there was a prophet. As the Adam is created before anyone else, Adam is there to guide. There's no one to guide at the moment. So Allah is so careful when it comes to the guidance of mankind, that there's a Nabi sent ahead of time. There's a Nabi there before there's guidance even needed. Nabi is equipped with all the guidance in the world. But he's sent ahead of time to go ahead and do what? To go ahead and guide people. Kind of like if you go on a journey, you expect the guide to be there to guide you around. You go to, a vacation to the jungles of Amazon, the forests of Amazon. You expect a guide to gonna take you around. You go for ziyarat, let's bring it closer to us. You want some guide to go ahead and take you. This is the zari, this is the haram of this imam, this is the qabr of this family member of imam, this is the house. All these guides that are there to guide you around. You need to have a guide. You go to Hajj for that matter. You can study all you want the Hajj, but you still want a guide for you to be able to guide you when it comes to the ahkam of Hajj. So the guide is placed before the guidance is needed. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did. وَلَمْ يَخْلُ اللَّهُ سُبْحَانَهُ خَلْقَهُ مِن نَبِيٍّ مُرْسَلٍ أَوْ كِتَابٍ مُنزَلٍ. Allah never allowed His creation to remain without a prophet, deputized by Him, or a book sent down from Him, or a binding argument, or a standing plea. Hujjatan lazima. Nabiyyin mursal, kitabin munzal, hujjatin lazima, wa mahjatin qa'ima. All of these things were provided ahead of time. Rusulun la tuqassiru bihim قِلَّةُ عَدَدِهِمْ وَلَا كَثْرَةُ الْمُكَذِّبِينَ لَهُمْ. What kind of Rasul are they? Now the Imam explains. The messengers were such that they did not feel little because of the smallness of their numbers. Of course, they were only 124,000. There were millions of people that passed through those 124,000 Anbiya. And sometimes one Nabi for millions of people, right? It wasn't like, there were millions of Anbiya and there were lesser people and there were more guides. No. Always Nabi were short in number. He said these messengers never were such that they did not feel little because of the smallness of their number. A lot of times what happens when you are minority, you start feeling pressure from the society and the community. But here, Anbiya, it didn't matter to them. Why? Because they had that strong backing in the form of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one who had raised them and sent them. And then, or of largeness of the number of their falsifiers. While there were few Nabi, there were bunch of mukazzibin who were falsifying the Anbiya, jhutla rahe the Nabiyon ko, or claiming themselves to be false Nabi as well. This ummah is still plagued with the false Nabi. 150 years ago, there were people who claimed to be Anbiya. Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Qadian, for example, or others of that type. Or from the Baha'i Mazhab, Babullah, right? He claimed the same thing. That initially said that I am the Messiah, then claimed to be what? Claimed to be the messenger. And then some of them made claims of being Allah. That's how they went up. Tarakki यूं हो रही थी इनकी. من سابق سمي له من بعده أو غابر عرفه من قبله ألا ذلك نسلت القرون ومضت الدهور وسلفت الآباء وخلقت الأبناء. That towards the end, he mentions that among them was either a predecessor who would name the one to follow, like Hazrat Yaqub would mention Hazrat Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam, or Anbiya would go ahead and name their, those who would come after them, or their predecessors, those who followed them before, or the follower who had been introduced by the predecessor. Concludes it. We'll stop over here as this then gets into the further discussion of, which is a segue into Mab'athul Nabi. So basically this Ikhtiyarul Anbiya goes into Mab'athul Nabi. Inshallah we'll stop over here. And we can mark it. Inshallah we'll continue the discussion from this moment on. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Yeah, all the wahi that was sent to different Anbiya. So for Nabi, our Nabi, what was the wahi that was sent to him? It was the Quran. And the other Anbiya, whatever wahi that was sent to them. So to some Nabi, it was Suhuf Ibrahim wa Musa, right? The Suhuf and the Sahifa of Hazrat Ibrahim and the Sahifa of Hazrat Musa. Or the Psalms of David, for example, to him. Or the alwah and the tablets to Hazrat Musa alayhi wasalam. And similarly, other scriptures that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent, that is what it's referring to. آخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل